The views expressed on the following broadcasts do not necessarily reflect those of KHLT, Take 12 Radio, or our affiliates. The opinions on this show should not be considered as medical, psychological, or professional advice and are those of the host, co-host, and guest. Take 12 Radio and KHLT Recovery Broadcasting are not affiliated with any particular 12-step fellowship.
One day at a time with its failures and fears, with portion of pain and burden of care, we must meet.
Welcome to Walking Through the Language of the Heart, a journey into the Grapevine writings of Alcoholics Anonymous co-founder Bill W. And now, here are your co-hosts, Chris S. and the Monty'man.
I absolutely love that song. It's such an upbeat sound to open up a show with. And why isn't my thing pausing? There we go. Yeah, Phil Keaggy. Gosh.
He's so good.
What an incredible talent. One of his good buddies, and I talked about him before, Brian Duncan. I'm going to be talking to him next week. And I'm going to give a shameful plug. Now, if this is in the future, way in the future for when this actually airs, you can go back in the archives and listen, listeners. But it's going to be my pleasure to welcome Ricky Byrd from Joan Jett and the Blackhearts. He's a member of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, and he's played with probably every musician that I can think of from the 70s, 80s, and 90s. I mean, the guy has just been around. He's going to be on the show next Monday. So you can tune into that, everybody, if you'd like, by visiting us at take12radio.com. And just so you know, if you want to catch up on these shows, the Walking Through the Language of the Heart, at your leisure, you can download and listen to all of them for fun and for free by going to take12radio.com and clicking on the Recovery Workshops banner. All right, Chris, what are we doing this week?
Monty, this week we have finally moved into part 2, believe it or not. It's like 30 shows, after like 30 shows
right?
Or something. We're finally in part 2, which is 1950 to 1958. So a lot of changes had happened. Alcoholics Anonymous had become very large with groups everywhere. And Bill was paying attention, right? I mean, he'd put the traditions together already. The 12 Steps and 12 Traditions was going to get published soon. The first convention is going to happen. This thing is really becoming a huge going concern. And so I have a feeling a lot of these articles are going to be about that, how AA really is coming of age. And, it's going to be interesting. So let me start by reading, there's a couple of paragraphs just prefacing part 2, and then we'll get into the article, which is We Approach Maturity, which was published in October 1949. The year 1950 brought 2 landmark events for Alcoholics Anonymous. The 12 Steps and 12 Traditions were adopted in July at the first International Convention in Cleveland. And 4 months later, on November 16th, Dr. Bob died. Wow. So that's pretty, important information. Yeah. I mean, Bill has got some balls up in the air with this one, and it's funny they had it in Cleveland because we've talked about how Akron and New York would had kind of a feud going on,
right?
So they had to compromise, and Cleveland had gotten a big group going, Clarence Snyder and a bunch of his people, and so they decided to have the convention there. As the surviving co-founder, Bill concentrated his energies for the next 5 years primarily on AA's future by consolidating its service structure. In 1950, he and Lois spent 6 weeks in Europe visiting AA in several countries. European AA flourished, yet the discrepancies Bill found among AA practices in different countries strengthened his belief in the need for a structure that would enable the fellowship to endure. He returned to North America convinced of the need to make literature available to foster local leadership and to expand AA services. To that end, as Bill reported in AA Comes of Age, fortified with the approval of the trustees and Dr. Bob, I stumped the country for the third legacy plan. The first General Service Conference met in April 1951, beginning a 5-year experimental period that ended in July 1955, when responsibility for AA's World Service, until then performed by the founding members, was turned over to the fellowship as a whole at the 20th anniversary convention in July 1955 at St. Louis. So that's a very, very quick snapshot of a lot of things that were going on. So we are on AA Grows to Maturity, segment 1, and the article is called We Approach Maturity. So, Alcoholics Anonymous is 14 years old, yet no one thinks we are just entering adolescence. On the contrary, we are approaching maturity. Therefore, our problems and responsibilities as a society are on the increase. It is becoming clear we cannot be forever immune from the fearful pressures that are tearing modern society apart. It's funny, in 1949, he's saying that the world is getting torn apart by fearful pressures. He should see today.
Oh my God!
Right?
Wow.
It was a sleepy little country in 1949.
Oh yeah.
It was the beginning of the baby boomer era. Everybody had good jobs, cars, houses, and were having babies. He should see 2023. Anyway, like other societies of men and women, we shall no doubt be tempted to enter upon on serious controversies. Perhaps some of us will seek fame and fortune at the expense of Alcoholics Anonymous. I guarantee that was a little jab at Clarence Snyder. We shall be tempted to attack those who attack us. We shall yearn for alliance with powerful friends. We shall wish to write laws and so enter politics. A lot of this is coming from Bill. I don't know that I wanted to do any of this,
right?
But to a degree, Bill was always latching on to powerful people and special people and remarkable people whenever he could, and I know that because of his own personal personality, that he didn't want a lot of Bill Wilsons running around.
Right.
He didn't want a lot of people that wanted to be number one running around. So when you look at the tradition, you look at the steps, the traditions, the concepts, so much of it is about right sizing ourselves and right sizing our groups and right sizing the service structure so that it can't go out to extremes. It will be difficult to remain neutral in the science versus religion conflict. Some might wish to see Alcoholics Anonymous divide on sectarian lines. And as we become better known, we shall certainly be offered large grants of destruction in the form of money. We might forget our resolve to stay poor. These may well be crucial problems of our maturity. Even now, one sees their outlines. So even in 1945, he's starting to see the outlines. We can see it plain as day today with a General Service Office that has a prudent reserve of $20 million.
Right.
So much for staying poor.
Yeah.
You know what I mean, Monty? I'm not knocking it. Don't I don't knock things.
No.
Yet I am deeply, yes, fervently convinced that Alcoholics Anonymous will weather all adversities and every test of time for so long as God shall need us. My faith in our future rests upon certain facts of our experience. You know, this was Bill's baby. He was so generous to to take the steps to turn this over and give it to us. But this was his baby. He had built it. He had architected this whole thing, and I think he was probably the person paying the most attention to the macro perspective of Alcoholics Anonymous. So he saw things that people in the groups wouldn't pay attention to. He's over in Europe, looking at AA there. He's watching all these different AAs. He's aggregating all this information, and in his head, he's beginning to devise protection systems for this fellowship. And he was the right guy for this job. You know what I mean, Monty?
Do you think that this was just part of being just like a protective parent, right? This was his child, and he knew that he was a mortal man and someday he wouldn't be here, and he was probably setting some things in motion, at least in his head, of ways to speak forth his concerns. And I wonder if a lot of these Grapevine articles he wrote intentionally for that purpose.
I think you're right. And I also think your analogy is wonderful. A parent, with a child, you know that they're going to leave home. Right. You know that they're going to be on their own. You're maybe a little bit apprehensive about it, but maturity is about allowing that to happen.
Yes.
So that's a wonderful analogy, Monty.
Yeah. I'm just hoping that my children, as they get older in their years, have as much money as the World Service Office has.
Yeah. I don't want to tell you what our prudent reserve is. I think I'm doing a better job than the central office at staying poor. But it is as it is. Okay. Yet I am deeply, yes, fervently convinced Alcoholics Anonymous will weather all adversities. So he had a lot of faith. He had seen so much, and I got to tell you, all the miracles and all the stories and all the growth and all the stuff that was happening in AA, it probably did give him a good feeling about because every year there was more members. Every year there was more dollars in the basket. Every year there was more recoveries. So I think he really saw God's hand on this, and it was good.
Chris, it's interesting. I'm just sitting here contemplating on how he was approaching all of this, means that he really didn't have a reference point. I mean, until this movement of Alcoholics Anonymous, there have been a lot of wonderful God-inspired movements of all kinds in our world, right? But there really hadn't been anything like this that was addressing the dregs of society, the people that most people would just look the other way or cross the street and walk down the other sidewalk. This was a fellowship of men and women like we had never seen before. And so he didn't really have anything to compare it to. He's being directed by the Almighty in a way. Not only was this his baby, but it was our firstborn.
They were lost and now they've been found. They're the prodigals.
Yeah.
Returning home. You're absolutely right. I think, I wasn't really around in 1950, but I can imagine that people were paying attention to this movement and, the remarkable recoveries and the remarkable growth was getting some people's attention. In today's day and age, AA is like a household word, and
Right.
people don't pay a lot of attention to it. But Uncle Charlie's drinking a lot, and he might have to go to those AAs one day. Yeah, but it was new
Yeah.
around 1950, and people were used to seeing people drink themselves to death. Uh, so many stories that go back into our ancestors and our family of origin. There's always stories about someone who died in their 30s or 40s, and they were a really heavy drinker.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And now there's an answer. And not only is the populace paying attention, and movies are being done and that have Alcoholics Anonymous in them. There's a bunch of them from the 50s that had AA as part of the plot of the movie. But medical people are paying attention. Psychiatric people are paying attention. Religious people are paying attention. This is the period of time where all of a sudden Alcoholics Anonymous started meeting in church basements, in
Yeah.
the 50s,
Yeah.
instead of people's houses. And I just kind of think it's remarkable. And somebody like Ken Burns should do like a 10-part documentary on this, because
Right.
it's so interesting, like, what happened and what it is today.
Right.
What it was like, what happened, what it's like today, just with Alcoholics Anonymous, is a fascinating story.
Yeah. He'd be the one to do it.
I think so. All right. First, we now humbly gaze upon 80,000 miracles of personal recovery. So I guess there was 80,000 members in 1949. We see that each of us has been enabled by God's grace to achieve the impossible. In each life, unity has risen far above former chaos. This being God's grant to us personally, we may, if we are worthy, surely expect an equal unity for AA as a whole. Now, another thing I just want to talk about briefly, because I showed up in Alcoholics Anonymous, Monty, in like 1989, and people were not mentioning God. As a matter of fact, people were saying, "Don't talk about God. You'll scare away the newcomers." I mean, I used to hear that in meetings, and someone would mention God, and people would get up and walk out or go get a coffee. It was so. If you look at Bill Wilson is always signifying where he believes the power has come from, where he believes that he believes that the driver of this whole thing is divine providence, and he mentions God constantly about how God's hand has been in this. And if you look at the 12 steps are basically a series of spiritual exercises that bring you into contact and relationship with God.
Yeah.
The traditions are a series of spiritual principles and best practices that allows God's conscience to operate with the group as a whole. God speaks through the group conscience, so you need a healthy group conscience, and that's what the traditions are about. And you look at all of this, and you understand where Bill was pointing all of us to. How did that get lost, Monty?
Yeah. Well, so I've said this on other shows that we've done before, and it's been a while since I have, so it bears repeating. In my experience in attending fellowship meetings from the East Coast. Of course, I live out here, but I've traveled some, and the closer you get to the West Coast, the harder it becomes to talk about God. It appears. I don't know if you go from like Akron, and then you moved out towards New York, and then you start moving out west. If it's a constant filtration that's happening, a watering down, if you will, and by the time it gets to the West Coast, it's anything goes kind of stuff. But I don't know. But out here, I've seen it. I've seen it fluctuate. I mean, right now, from what I can gather, from the people that I rub shoulders with on a regular basis out here, it seems to be, at the very least, people are much more open to say, look, I don't know who this God is, but I'm praying anyway because I'm going to do what it says. Whereas 20 years ago, it was, don't even say that. In fact, you would get criticized if you even said the phrase higher power at one point. So I don't know, Chris. It almost feels like the disintegration of the core values of Alcoholics Anonymous are slowly happening. That it's falling apart, and it's kind of running neck and neck with the way our nation's moving. That's kind of been my observation. I'm seeing a lot of what happens in our country happening in AA too. And so all I can do is chalk it up to something's happening on a spiritual plane. Let your heart not be troubled. God's got this, but it's going to look like a mess sometimes.
I love that. I don't mean to sound like Alcoholics Anonymous today is like, has abandoned God. I think to a degree it's gotten much better over the last 30 years, and it's much more acceptable in the discourse in the meetings to be talking about God much more than it used to be. So to a degree, I think it's heading in the right direction. There's just so many people that have gotten back to the basics. They've gone back to the book Alcoholics Anonymous. They've gotten back to the basics of the 12 steps. And you can't do that and remain separated from the concept of God,
right?
The God idea. You can't, So, and I think that renaissance that has happened. I think Joe and Charlie started. There was a bunch of people that got it going, and it became a renaissance to get back to basics. An awakening of what originally worked, and how it wasn't working as well now. So
sure.
Maybe we should pay attention to how they used to do it, and that became orthodox. It was and I think things have gotten better. But Bill is saying God's got this.
So there's a fellowship meeting that I attend on Friday evenings. And it's interesting because I don't know that this is unique. It's unique for our area, but God is mentioned freely. People are God specific. People will use will say Jesus. People will say one guy will say Allah. Most people say God, or they'll say heavenly. There's a lot of Heavenly Father mentioned. There's a lot of the Creator mentioned, and also the statement "the Lord" is mentioned. And nobody, there's always one. You have to have one, right? I mean, that's the requirement. You got to have one, right? There's always one. But other than that, everybody is fine with it. In fact, it is such a supportive and encouraging and uplifting meeting. Yeah, I mean, it's like two of my favorite days of the week are Sunday and Friday. And because I know that when I go to these different events, that when I leave there, I will have had an opportunity to do my part, and I will also have been blessed deeply every single time. It's exciting to go. I can't always say that was the case in meetings over the years, but this one, it's that way. And, it really doesn't. There are a lot of Judeo-Christian believers in that group that will speak freely about who God is, and the people that do not subscribe to that are not intimidated by that. They don't complain about it. They have no problem with it whatsoever, other than this one individual who likes to remind everybody, we don't shove God down people's throats. And everybody kind of, just keeps loving the guy, but he keeps coming back. So I'm like, and he's been around a while. So I'm like, well, okay, God's going to get a hold of you one of these days, So I'm not worried about it. But it is so refreshing. And if there's a meeting like that here, there's got to be more, right? There's got to be a lot of meetings like that. Lots of meetings like that.
I think it's gotten much more inclusive, spiritually inclusive. I really do. The live and let live comes to mind, and
well, it cracks me up, Chris. It cracks me because somebody said the other day that somebody that doesn't go to that meeting said, "Yeah, well, you know why a lot of people in this area don't like going to that meeting because they talk about God too much." The thing that's so weird about that is that meeting's packed.
Yeah, right. they used to criticize the Big Book meeting that I was a part of back in the late '90s. Everybody criticized it, but people were coming from four states.
Don't you love it
to go there?
I know.
So,
I love it.
It really was a bad meeting. People are coming from Connecticut.
God,
it was nuts. Okay, let's see what he says here. Second, we are sure there must be 1 million alcoholics who would join Alcoholics tomorrow if only they knew what we do. We keenly realize that any fundamental disunity among us could instantly disillusion tens of thousands who would again turn their faces to the wall. Hence, those disruptions common to great wealth, power, or controversy ought never be for us. Too many of the millions who don't yet know would surely die. I want to mention this to Monty. I was at an event down in Delaware a couple of weeks ago, and I gave a talk, right? And in the talk, so much of when I'm speaking comes just from inspiration. It's very little of it is ever planned or outlined out.
Mm-hmm.
I really do just speak extemporaneously. But what jumped into my mind was a call to action. I was speaking about the 12th step, and I was talking about how necessary it is for us to continue to seek out the alcoholics, not necessarily wait for them to come to us at a meeting and ask for help, but to find the still sick and suffering alcoholics by doing boots on the ground 12-step work, right?
Yeah, sure.
The way they ask us to do it in the chapter Working with Others. So one of the things I said, and it came into my mind and I said it, but I just know it's true, that there's probably 10 million alcoholics out there who know Alcoholics Anonymous won't work for them. They know it in their heart, right? It would work for them
right.
if they tried,
right.
but they know it won't. so they're not going to come. And then there's a whole series of people out there that did try AA because they were, coerced into it one way or another. And they went to a number of meetings. And then finally resented their way out of the groups because of the craziness that goes on in the meetings
Yeah.
without ever touching the recovery part of Alcoholics Anonymous. So again, I really do think that he's talking about millions who don't yet know about Alcoholics Anonymous, but there's millions now that do know about Alcoholics Anonymous, but they know the wrong thing. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And so then it becomes, I think it becomes our responsibility. I mean, even though we can recognize, I mean, I'm going to pick on him here. I'll just use first names. Chris, not you, Chris, another Chris. Myers, let's use that name. You get guys like that standing behind a pulpit, you better watch out, because if you're screwing around with AA and you're teaching the wrong stuff, you better duck, because they're coming for you. You know what I mean? And I think we do need folks like that, but I also think we need to have folks that say, wait a minute, hold on, pump the brakes. I understand that you may have had an experience at a meeting that has really soured you, just like I had an experience at a church that soured me, or at a restaurant where I got food poisoning, but I didn't stop going, So let's try another. Let's try another meeting. Let's try another fellowship. There's one on every corner, at least in this county.
Sure.
And help kind of fill in those dry spots, and because again, God hasn't left Alcoholics Anonymous. I got Christian friends that bless their little hearts. They're like, well, God's just not there anymore. And I'm going, really? Wow. Wow, you're an authority on that, are you? I think God is alive and well in Alcoholics Anonymous, in Narcotics Anonymous, in these other I think he's alive and well, and I don't think we need to be freaked out. I think we need to make corrections where it's called for, like some of these guys do, but I also think we need to take time and say, thank God for this fellowship that is still alive and well and functioning in people's lives, and people are recovering.
Yeah, absolutely. So it says, therefore, our fifth tradition declares each AA group ought to be a spiritual entity having but one primary purpose, that of carrying its message to the alcoholic who still suffers. And again, the meeting that I was at a couple of weeks ago, carry the message to the alcoholic that still suffers. That means more than just at your group.
Yeah.
And I think it's something that's been dropped. So many things have changed. And one of the things is the wet drunk work, the searching at the 12-step calls, the going out, to the different institutions and looking for alcoholics. A lot of that has fallen by the wayside. And I believe truly in my heart that there's millions of alcoholics out there that know AA won't work for them, but it will.
Right.
And there's millions of alcoholics out there that said they tried AA and it didn't work for them, and they didn't try it. They just went to it.
I wonder what would happen. I wonder what would happen if a group every once in a while of AAs would go out and with their big book, and would go to some of the highways and byways, like some of the city parks where a lot of folks hang out that aren't real healthy, maybe, or maybe some of the homeless camps, and just sat down with a hot cup of coffee or cocoa, and just started talking to these guys. Forget about the meeting. Let's make that secondary. Let's sit down and talk to the guy, and see if this guy qualifies. Is he even interested? I'll bet there's a lot of people out there. If somebody would just make the approach, they would fold in a minute.
Yep. I totally believe that too. I think what you're doing is really good. I think that there's a lot of people who are involved in the media, or they're taping speakers or whatever. A lot of people will find that stuff online, and that might be their first visitation with recovery.
Right.
So that's also a good vehicle for carrying the message to people. But more has to be done. Our statistics, they're not publishing this from New York, but I can see it. Our statistics are declining.
Yeah.
You know
Yeah.
what I mean?
Yeah.
And I just think there's a call to action, Monty. What do you say?
Well, I think we got it. Somebody said this about 6 years ago. Somebody was on I don't remember who was on my show, but he says, we have got to step up to the plate. We are going to get bombarded with co-occurring mental health issues like never before. And people that have had a spiritual awakening as a result of these steps need to get off their butt and step up to the plate.
Yeah.
And I agree.
Yeah. This isn't. It's not a cafeteria where you just go and you take what you want and you ingest it and you go home. It's a giving. It's a giving back fellowship.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. And if you miss that piece, it's an easy piece to miss today. If you miss that piece, you're missing everything.
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
So long as we remain grateful for what has befallen us, and for so long as this tradition of high and single purpose is indelibly emblazoned on our hearts, our destiny will be assured. We shall be worthy of God's providence. Well, that's an amazing paragraph there. Oh, wow. So our single purpose, that of carrying the message to the still sick and suffering alcoholic, needs to be indelibly emblazoned on our hearts, Monty. I love the way he writes.
Don't you think? Do you think though that one of the reasons things have changed, gone in the negative though, is because many people don't really know what the message is. They've been taught wrong.
I had a call yesterday. So all my old work friends know that when there's somebody in trouble, like I've worked at 50 places, so I've got work friends that I don't work with anymore, but they've all got my number and they all know that I'll help if somebody's in trouble. And I got this guy on the phone. 15 years he's been in and out of recovery. And when he started talking, I'm like, where did you get this information? It was unbelievable to me that he was thinking a 4-step was a gratitude list, and he was thinking that I mean it was the most jumbled, crazy perspective on what Alcoholics Anonymous was. I go, dude, you need, where do you live? And he tells me where he lives. Right? I go, okay, I know a group 5 miles from your house. Oh, is it the Big Bookers? Yes, it is. And you have been trying it. You've been trying it in the other meetings, and obviously you're not really getting great information because I don't even know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
When you're talking to me. So I would suggest that you head for this meeting, find somebody at that meeting who sounds like they know what they're doing, go up to them and say this: I can't stop drinking. Will you take me through the steps? That's what I want you to do. And I want you to call me back next week at this time and tell me you've done that. And I want to know what's happening, okay? That's what you need to do. Listen, if the meetings you were going to would work, they would have worked.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
you're what we describe as a real alcoholic. You're not going to
Yeah.
recover by going to a discussion meeting somewhere. You know what I mean? You know
Right.
what I mean? So anyway, I had this long talk with him. He either thinks I'm crazy or he's going to call me back in a week and say, I can't believe it, but I asked this guy and I'm on the fourth step and answering everything is, I can't, it's going to be one or the other. You know what I mean? But, oh man.
Oh,
I don't
that's
know.
funny. Hey, I got a statement / question for you.
Sure.
So a person who is a good friend of mine and attends a meeting that I attend on a regular basis, who also listens to this show on a regular basis, as well as started listening to the series Walking Through the Big Book. And she came to me, and she usually, when she sees me, she's all smiles. Wow, what great shows this week, Monty, blah, blah. She wasn't smiling. And she goes, can I ask you a question? And I said, yeah. And I hope she's listening now. She probably will be. I said, sure. She goes, so I listened to Walking Through the Big Book, and you and Chris were talking, and so do you guys really believe that meetings are a waste of time? If we're not doing certain things in the meetings, that they're a waste of time? And I don't recall, it's been a long time since I've actually gone through that, but I said, well, I'd have to really listen to that piece to really get it in context.
Get it in context, right.
I said, but I used the term you used. I said, we were pretty evangelical back then. I would say that if you're not representing in the meetings the program of Alcoholics Anonymous as it's lined out in the book, then it's really, in my opinion, it's really not an AA meeting. It's a coffee club. Is it a waste of time? Probably not. You're getting some coffee. I don't know. How would you address that?
So if I said something like that, you'd have to add the context to it, because meetings are not a waste of time. They're a spiritual discipline that is absolutely necessary for our sanity and our spiritual condition, right? But there are better meetings than others.
Sure.
If someone tells you there's no such thing as a bad AA meeting, they certainly haven't gone to some of the ones I went to.
Right.
So it all starts with the fellowship. Thank God for the fellowship, and thank God for the discussion meetings I went to, because what happened was it created a tentative sobriety for me. Just going to these meetings created a sobriety that was going to be tentative, right? I'm not going to stay sober just going to meetings. But what it did was it brought me out of the basement and back into society where there's people, and all these people are about the business of not drinking and helping others to continue to not drink. And that was my first experience with fellowship. Now, if I didn't find my way into recovery, which is it's an informed methodology of taking the 12 steps from the book Alcoholics Anonymous, I wouldn't have made it. So and I didn't get that from the meetings. They weren't talking about that in the meetings. I had to get that outside of the meetings, from speaker tapes and from Big Book, studying the Big Book and things like that, right?
Right.
So I don't believe meetings are a waste of time. I think if all you're doing is going to meetings, you're wasting your time.
Gotcha.
Does that make any sense?
That makes total sense. If that's all you're doing is popping in those meetings and drinking the coffee and talking about your day, then that's all you're doing.
Yeah, you could do that at the PTA. You could do that at the Lions Club.
Yeah.
You could be running charity drives and doing something good with your time. You know what I mean? But I do not mean to ever denigrate meetings. Even the bad ones serve a purpose.
Sure, they lead us to the other ones.
They keep those people out of our meetings.
All right, you get a sound effect for that.
That's the best. You know that's a joke.
All right, right on. All righty. Well, folks, we are closing out another episode of this workshop, Walking Through the Language of the Heart. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you, Monty.
Absolutely. All right, folks, our email address is take12radio@comcast.net. That's the number 12. Please email us with your questions, your comments. Like us, hate us. We'd just love to hear from you. And until our next broadcast, this is the Monty'man along with Chris S., and we are wishing God's perfect serenity for you. For more recovery workshops with Chris S. and the Monty'man, visit our website at take12radio.com and click on the Recovery Workshops banner.
This has been a broadcast of Take 12 Recovery Radio and KHLT Recovery Broadcasting.
Kitty, 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 kitty. Meow, meow, meow.
Woof, woof.